Question 1. What made the colonies so different if they were all settled by people from the same country? Our goals for this lesson. We're going to learn about the arrival of the first English-speaking people in America. We'll consider how the 13 English colonies in America were similar and different by looking at economics, religion, and labor practices. Our big idea for this lesson. The United States is made up of many different people, but the origins of the nation lie in English settlements along the Atlantic coast in the 1600s. People came there for different reasons, and some were brought from Africa as slaves. Let's get started with our introduction. The United States was created by English-speaking people who lived in 13 distinct colonies strung out along the Atlantic coast. By the time they declared independence in 1776, they had been living there for over 150 years. They were all from the same mother country, but the 13 colonies were all different. In fact, most historians agree that only by the particular alignment of factors, brilliant leadership, and a willingness to compromise did they ever agree to fight for independence at all. Why were they so different, and how? Why do we have to speak of them as 13 colonies rather than England and America? Certainly you and your friends are not so different. Even you and your neighbors are not so different that you would have to create separate colonies if you moved to a new land. Why was it then that the English settlers ended up so divided? Why were the British colonies so different?
Virginia and the South. English businessmen pooled their resources to form joint stock companies to share in the cost and risk of investing in America. The first such company paid for the establishment of Jamestown in Virginia in 1610. Jamestown was a failure in the beginning. The settlers did not know how to farm, so they starved. Only with help from the local Native Americans did some settlers survive. However, they discovered that they could grow tobacco, which they could sell back in Europe. Tobacco made Jamestown and the surrounding Chesapeake Bay region profitable. John Smith was an influential leader in Jamestown in these early years. The area around Jamestown was settled by the Powhatan Native American people. They had a tense relationship with the English settlers. Sometimes they helped the settlers, but when the English took native lands, they went to war. An important tradition established in the Chesapeake Bay region was the House of Burgesses. Neither England nor Virginia were democracies, since the poor had little influence in both societies. However, the wealthy plantation owners in Virginia met regularly to make laws for their colony. This House of Burgesses helped establish a tradition of self-rule that the colonists were willing to fight for in the 1770s. Much of the work done in the British colonies was first done by indentured servants. These poor people from Great Britain could not afford to pay for passage to America. Someone in America paid it for them in exchange for a set number of years to work. This system of indenture had some problems. Wealthy people who paid for the passage of others were rewarded with land, a practice that made the rich richer. Another problem was that the indentured servants could run away and blend in since they were English. Slavery was not an English invention. The Spanish and Portuguese had been using African slaves for many years. The first African slaves in the English colonies were probably brought from the Caribbean islands rather than directly from Africa. Eventually, slaves were brought directly from Africa to the southern colonies. Compared to life in Brazil or the Caribbean islands, life for slaves was better in America. American slaves lived long enough to have children, which led to a natural increase in the slave population. This meant that the importation of slaves died out in America in the 1800s. Merchants made a lot of money buying and selling slaves. They were an important part of the triangle trade. Slaves were purchased in Africa and brought to the Americas. Sugar, tobacco, cotton, and other raw materials were loaded onto the ships in America and taken back to Europe. In Europe, the ships were reloaded with finished products like furniture and guns, which were shipped off to America. In time, slaves were seen as property, the same as horses or wagons. This was called chattel slavery. Strict laws or codes were passed throughout the colonies, defining the various rights slaves did not have and restricting aspects of their lives. Some slaves resisted, but these rebellions were always stopped and resulted in the passage of more strict slave codes. In the colonies, owning slaves became an important symbol of status for whites. Only a few wealthy whites actually owned slaves. In the Chesapeake region, Virginia, North Carolina, Delaware, Maryland, slaves worked on plantations growing tobacco. In the Deep South, South Carolina and Georgia, slaves worked on plantations growing rice, sugar, and eventually cotton. The most socially segregated society was in South Carolina, which had been founded by Englishmen from the island of Barbados. Slaves outnumbered whites in both colonies. In the Deep South, cotton and rice were the main products. New England. In England, everyone had to belong to the official Church of England, which was led by the king or queen. Some did not like this. They either wanted to purify the church or separate from the church. Both groups caused problems for the government, so they were encouraged to leave. Plymouth was founded by separatists called Pilgrims. They arrived on the Mayflower. They were a small group, but set an important precedent in America by agreeing to the Mayflower Compact and holding elections for community leaders. The Plymouth colony would have failed if it were not for the help of local Native Americans. The tradition of Thanksgiving comes from this colony. A much larger group came to nearby Massachusetts Bay Colony. They were Puritans rather than separatists. They believed in a covenant with God. They thought that if they were good Christians, God would reward them and make their colony prosper. They also believed their colony would be an example of a pure society on earth that everyone else could copy. They referred to it as a city upon a hill. These are still important ideas in American myth. Many thousands of Puritans came over time, and eventually the Plymouth colony was absorbed into Massachusetts. Puritans were strict. Everyone had to follow the colony's rules, which included attending church. They believed strongly in education because they wanted people to be able to read the Bible. They founded Harvard and Yale universities to train new ministers. New England was not settled as a business like Jamestown. New England was made up of towns with families instead of plantations with single owners and slaves. New Englanders exported fish, lumber, built ships, and traded. The Middle Colonies. New York was first founded by settlers from the Netherlands. They came to trade for beaver. Like the English colonies in the Chesapeake and Deep South, they had a society with a rigid social hierarchy. However, the Dutch were traders, and people from many countries came to New Amsterdam. The Dutch were not in America for long. When the English took their colony, they renamed it New York, but the cosmopolitan, pluralistic, trading-based tradition lives on. Pennsylvania was also founded as a colony for religious dissidents from England. The Quakers were a group who believed in pacifism and equality. They were persecuted in England, but William Penn, a wealthy Quaker, obtained land from the king as a refuge for his fellow Quakers. They founded the town of Philadelphia, treated Native Americans with respect, and guaranteed religious freedom for residents of their colony. Pennsylvania played an important role in later years as a meeting place between North and South with its tradition of openness. The Founding Fathers met in Philadelphia to write the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. During the colonial era, the most famous American was Benjamin Franklin. He was an author, publisher, and scientist who made his home in Pennsylvania. Maryland was founded as a haven for Catholics who were persecuted in England. Like Pennsylvania, although it was founded as a home for a particular religious group, it offered religious freedom for all people. Maryland is next door to Virginia and developed a slave and tobacco-based economy like its larger neighbor. Georgia was first founded as a home for poor people back in England who were in debtor's prison. Over time, Georgia came to resemble South Carolina in its social structure and economy. While English settlers dominated the coastal regions of America and the government of the colonies, other groups also made the trip across the Atlantic. German settlers and Scotch-Irish avoided the coasts and moved inland, making their home in the Appalachian Mountains. These people were fiercely independent, distrustful of the wealthy and those in government, and have left an enduring mark on American culture in states such as West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, and to a lesser degree on their neighbors.
Conclusion. The English who arrived on American shores in the 1600s spread out along the coast and created 13 distinct colonies. We can group them by region. For example, the New England colonies were close together and share some of the same history. and are clearly distinct from South Carolina and its slave-based culture. But even Rhode Island and Connecticut, as close together as they are still different places. Why is this? Why did the English who came to America, despite all being from the same homeland, end up creating such different colonies?